Our last tape-recorded conversation also takes place in State Representative Vincent Piro's office. This meeting was between Piro and FBI undercover agent John Callahan, Jack Collins. This meeting took place on April 21st, 1983.
Hey, Jack.
Hi, Vinny.
Come on in.
How you doing, Vinny? How have you been?
Everything all right?
How are you?
Have a seat. Good.
Jeez, I see you got your pink cards out, huh?
Oh, great. Listen, I'm glad you called me because I'm really distressed, okay? The last time you were in, you said I was going to give you a call. The last time you were in, you came in and did something for me.
Yeah.
Gave me the envelope, and Jesus Christ, like I told you then, I don't do things like that.
Yeah.
And I've been thinking about it. It's been bothering me.
All right.
And I've never done this before in 15 years that I've been here.
All right.
All right. And I decided it. I don't want to start now.
Fine.
But
great,
the
I'm
main
happy.
thing is I don't want to offend you because you're a decent guy, and
Yeah.
I know you didn't mean to offend me.
Yeah.
And if I thought there was a problem, I'd say, Jack, Jesus, this is...
Like Timmy said, Vinny will tell you what the deal is. And I said, whatever Vinny says, I'll do.
Timmy is my friend, and so I didn't want to hurt him, and I didn't realize it, and it happened so damn quick. Bing, 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 bing. But what I want to do is I want to give this back to you.
Oh, fine.
Another thing is you got to feel that I'm going to support the bill.
Fine.
I mean, it's something that you absolutely, it's justified. I mean, it's something that's good for the city. It's good for you. I've been here, like I say, 15 years. People come to me, Jack, all the time, and I do 100 favors.
No problem.
And I've never done this. I've never done it on quid pro quo, and I've never done it on quid pro quo. I've always done it because they've been right, and that's the way it's right.
That's super. That makes me happy.
And I didn't want to change my style now.
Right. That's great.
And I mean, that's the way I've done it, and Timmy sort of got me on guard, will you do this guy a favor? And I didn't even know what the F he was doing.
Yeah.
I really didn't know what he was doing, and then when I saw the whole thing, I thought he was full of S. I just passed him off, and when the thing happened like that, I said, hey, I just can't, and I know that you did not mean to. I don't do anything that's illegal, immoral, unethical. I've never done that, and I don't want to start now.
You are doing me a favor because you like the bill, you like the hotel.
Right.
You like Somerville,
That's right.
jobs, et cetera.
Absolutely.
And that's how it's going to go.
And that's the way it'll go. And I say you are under no obligation to anybody.
Fine.
The thing has done to you are justified, you deserve it, the city deserves it.
Right.
It's for the benefit of the city.
Right.
Not for the benefit of the individual, and that's the way it should be played, so I'm glad that you and I got together. And I know that you did it in the spirit of good faith, but believe me...
No problem.
Terrific.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jack.
Have a good one.
I'll talk to you soon.
All righty.
At this point, we originally intended to return to the trial on Wednesday, October 10, 1984, when Vincent Piro took the stand in his own defense and was questioned by his lawyer, Robert Popio. However, due to time pressures presented by Mr. Piro and to the fact that he will have 1.5 hours following this program to present his own case, we will move to the 2 concluding segments. Our actors will now read excerpts from the closing arguments presented in federal court Thursday, October 11, 1984. First, Prosecutor John Papalardo of the U.S. Attorney's Office.
In 1980, the East Bay Development Corporation had occasion to be confronted by the Federal Bureau of Investigation in connection with an ongoing investigation that involved a third person, Mr. Robert Goodoak. As a result of that, they began to cooperate with the federal government. This cooperation took the form of East Bay informing the authorities what it was that they were doing in the land development business, who it was that was hitting them up for payments, who it was that they had to pay homage to, if you will, in order to conduct their business. An undercover agent was brought in because a trained professional is a person best equipped to deal with issues of investigations. Enter Mr. John Collins, Agent Callahan, to you. He focuses in on one individual, Timothy Creedon. Why does he pick Mr. Creedon? Because Mr. Creedon is the Ward 1 alderman. The Assembly Square Mall was developed in Ward 1. Why else did he pick Timothy Creedon? Because Creedon sought attention. He had made complaints to Mr. James Chadwick of East Bay because he felt he was being left out of the conversations. Mr. Chadwick meets with Creedon, and in September of 1981, Agent Callahan meets with Creedon. I submit to you the testimony from Mr. Creedon and Agent Callahan, and the tape, if you were able to detect it, showed that on 3 occasions Mr. Creedon mentioned the name of Representative Piro. What does Timmy Creedon say at a later meeting? He says, "Listen, Jack, if you need this hotel, you have to consider 3 things through the BOA, Board of Aldermen. 121A, tax agreement, approved by the Board of Aldermen. UDAG financing, low-cost federally funded financing. See, you may need that in connection with the hotel. You also need liquor licenses. And in order to get liquor licenses, says Timmy Creedon, you have to go through the BOA, and then you have to go through the State House. And who do you have to see at the State House? Vinnie Piro, Vinnie Piro, Vinnie Piro." At a later meeting, early in 1982, Creedon says to Callahan, $2 grand an alderman per vote. That's $6 grand in total for the 3 packages, 121A, UDAG, and liquor licenses. What else happens in very early 1982? Creedon introduced Callahan to Andy Puglia, an alderman and an aide to Piro. After all is said and done, what does he say? "My advice to you, that to protect these liquor licenses, you have to change the statutes. You file a home rule petition with the BOA. Then you go to the State House. You go to Vinnie Piro." Everything that Callahan at that point in time has points to one person. If liquor licenses are needed, you have to go to Vinnie Piro. How does he do it? Through Timmy Creedon, because Timmy's the guy who's telling him that's what's happening. Fall of 1982 or mid-1982, what happens? All of this talk, all of these discussions about liquor licenses and UDAG and things of that nature now come to a head. A real person comes on the scene, a person unfamiliar with undercover investigations, a person who has an idea to build a hotel at the Assembly Square site. What does he do? He executes an option to purchase that land to build a hotel. When it comes to the point where liquor licenses are no longer a figment of somebody's imagination, but are reasonably required for an up-and-coming project, Timmy Creedon says, "I need $1,500 an alderman, times 9, 2 shares for me, $13,500. Timmy Creedon says that, not the undercover agent. The undercover agent pays him a down payment of $5,000. The bill's filed. In February of 1983, the Home Rule petition passes. In February of 1983, Callahan says to Timmy Creedon, "Can you get me in to see Vinnie Piro? All I want is an introduction." Mr. Creedon goes into Rep. Piro's office on March 4th, sits down with Piro, and what happens next is along the lines of what Timmy Creedon said to you happened, which is he goes in and asks, "What's the status of the legislation?" Piro says, "Legislation isn't going anywhere. It's going to cost them. It's not going for zilch. Those cheap bastards up at the mall better know that." "How much?" 20 grand. "I know Ray Coots and Jim Chadwick." "Well, I know Collins." "You handle it then. And there's a little something in it for you, Timmy. You be my bag man. There's a little something in it for you, $5,000, $6,000. Get back to me." From that point on, ladies and gentlemen, there's no need for speculation. There's no need for conjecture. There's no need to determine what was said. You have it. It's on tape. That happens on March 4th. What's the first thing Timmy Creedon says to Callahan on the phone on March 7th, the following Monday? "I've got a problem." Not, "You have a problem, I've got a problem." What's my problem? "Vinnie's put me in the middle of this. The liquor license is fine, but it's not going for zilch. It's going to go through, but you know that anyway." Now, from that point on, Callahan engages in efforts to make sure that Creedon is telling him the truth. What are those efforts? He sits down with him at the 57 restaurant and says, "Listen, how does Jim Chadwick know that this deal is really not you on a frolic of your own? How does he know that Vinnie Piro is really involved if I can't sit down with him?" And he says to him, "What about the price? What about the figure you said wasn't for zilch, the 20 grand? What about that?" What does Creedon say to him? Creedon says to him, "Well, don't tell Vinnie, but I think you can get it for 15. Now, is that somebody who's so desperate he crawls to the door of Vinnie Piro and says all of this money is for me? Is that his deal if he's undercutting the deal? I don't think so. What next happens is on March 16th, Chadwick calls Representative Piro, and the purpose, of course, is to see whether Representative Piro is involved. Play the tape if your memory isn't clear on this. You heard it yesterday. Jim Chadwick. Jim, how you doing? Like they're old friends. But Piro claims yesterday he doesn't know the guy. Jim, how you doing? Now, who was the aggressor? Who says what in that phone call? Piro says, I know why you're calling me. As soon as I get the word from Timmy, and I know you want to know that Timmy's involved, as soon as I get the word from Timmy, we'll move that thing. Chadwick hasn't said anything yet except hello and it's a nice day. Piro says, I think I know you well enough to take off the gloves. Why don't you come in and see me? What next happens at the meeting between Callahan and Piro? The thing wasn't moving, even though it comes under home rule. The thing wasn't moving because that is the way the process is played. Okay, here is the deal, says Piro. It will be 25, total of 25, 5 up front, 20 when it is signed into law. First, 5 has to be a little walking around money, got to do some things, got to grease a few guys. Callahan says, that is your business. I don't want to know it. Is that somebody who was out to get Vinnie Piro? No. That is a trained criminal investigator. Because what he was doing was he was there if Vinnie Piro was going to be crooked. If he wasn't, if this was just a plain meeting, then Callahan wasn't going to put anything in Vinnie Piro's mouth. Later on in the conversation, what happens? Vinnie, how do you want me to handle the money? Well, you deal with me. Where is Timmy Creedon at this juncture? The guy that Mr. Piro says, I was just humoring Timmy? Come on, ladies and gentlemen. Bring your common sense with you to the jury room. Not only does he say, you deal with me, but then he proceeds to undercut Timmy Creedon. If this money was all for Timmy Creedon, why would he say to him, tell Creedon it is 15. Tell him you pinched. But the actual deal is 25. What happens next? Callahan returns a call to Piro. Piro says, well, what is the story? You going to come up or what? Callahan says, well, yes, I'm going to come up. Can I do it tomorrow? I have the first package. I have the first 5. What does Piro say? Does he say, oh, God, please don't bring it to me. I have thought about this, and you know, and he says beautiful or terrific or great or something of that nature. He knew it was coming. What happens the next day, March 30th? Callahan goes in, still in a passive frame of mind. Not the aggressor, as Mr. Popio will tell you. What does he do? He sits down. What does Vinnie say? Are you ready? Is everything all ready to go? Yes. Bang. 5 grand. Oh, good, Piro says. That will go the normal process. We will move this bill right away. It will take about a week. When does it happen in the meeting? It happens within the first 30 seconds of the meeting. Who was on the offense? Who was reacting? If Piro was all caught up in the cold, hard reality of the first bribe he has ever taken in his life, he didn't miss a beat. There was no evidence of shock, didn't miss a single word. Bang, 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 bang. Now, what does Piro then talk about? Well, I didn't mean to put East Bay in a box in 1979, MDC legislation. I didn't mean to put them in a box. I killed my own bill, but I didn't mean to put them in a box. What happens next? This FBI agent, this trained investigator says, you know Paul Haley? Normal question, a question calculated to elicit a response. Yes, no. Vinnie Piro says, yes, and launches into a tirade. What does he say? Paul Haley, you can't trust him. I had a deal with Paul Haley, 10 up front, 25 when it is signed into law, and 50 the year after. And what does he do? He leaves me holding the bag for the speaker. He wasn't making a single bit of that up. That was all true. What he wants you to believe is he was making it all up. What he wants you to believe, this was just a big game because he was realizing at this point in time that maybe, just maybe, there might be something wrong with this. Baloney. He knew exactly what he was doing. You have heard testimony by several people in connection with what occurred after all of this went down. You heard about the return of the money. Ask yourselves, what is your memory on the return of the money? Callahan walks in. What is the first thing Callahan says on the tapes? Vinnie, I see you got your pink cards out. Vinnie is reading from his pink cards, little index cards. I have never done anything immoral, illegal, unethical. I'm a Boy Scout. I ask you if that is the same Vinnie Piro that you heard before on the tapes. Now, there is one other problem with this. It is not the same money that was returned. What is Mr. Piro's explanation for that money? His explanation is that I gave back the same money. The government, I submit to you, has proven that the money that was returned was not only not the same money, but was different denominations, different serial numbers. If Piro didn't touch the money, who did? Agent Callahan? Agent Callahan is going to risk his entire career with the FBI to switch money to get Vinnie Piro? Preposterous. Of course he didn't. A pure and simple reality of life, ladies and gentlemen, is this. We are dealing with a case of political corruption. Political corruption is not tempting people. Political corruption isn't entrapment. Political corruption is this. It is when a legislator, a powerful legislator, says to you, you want this legislation? Here's the deal. That's the way the process is played. It will be 25. 5 up front, 20 more. That's political corruption. And you are not going to get the political corruption unless and until you employ methods as devious as those used by those who perpetrate corruption. The defense is, put the government on trial, put Callahan on trial, put everybody on trial but Vinnie Piro. Mr. Popio tells you that returning the money is reasonable doubt. Listen to the judge's instructions on that. Number one, you cannot undo a crime that has been done for whatever reason. You can't do it. It is not legally permissible. You don't go around and rob a bank and 3 weeks later say, I didn't have the intent to do it. I'm sorry, I was confused. The devil made me do it. It is preposterous. The crime is committed. Period. Number two, what else is the fallacy of that argument? The fallacy is he didn't return the money. Do you think that Vinnie Piro did a little walking around? $500 isn't there. It's different money. Ladies and gentlemen, I submit to you, flat out, that Piro was lying to the grand jury pursuant to a target letter in an effort not to be indicted. And I submit to you further that that lying continued on the stand. You are innocent until proven guilty. And I submit to you, the government has proven Mr. Piro guilty.
We have just heard an excerpt from the prosecution's closing arguments. We will now hear an excerpt from the closing argument by Representative Piro's defense attorney, Robert Popio, made prior to jury deliberations, October 11, 1984.
When this case began, I told you right at the outset of my opening there were 2 irrefutable facts. 1, that Mr. Piro received $5,000. 2, that Mr. Piro returned $5,000. There is a 3rd irrefutable fact that I call to your attention now. Mr. Piro returned the money before he knew that Agent John Callahan was an agent of the FBI. He returned that money to John J. Collins. We say that fact alone is enough to acquit Mr. Piro because it creates a reasonable doubt as to his intentions to keep it. Mr. Pappalardo has told you to speculate as to what Mr. Piro's mind was at the time. You can't speculate. You take this evidence and you can draw inferences from it, but you cannot speculate as to what occurred. Now, speaking of speculations, you heard Agent Callahan say he had a strong suspicion that Mr. Piro knew his identity. Now I ask you, did you hear any evidence about that, about what that suspicion was? Don't you think Piro would have told his brother, Peter Piro, this guy's an FBI agent, stay away from him? Instead, he has him, that is his brother Peter, solicit a political contribution from Callahan. Do you really think that an FBI agent who knows the cover has been blown calls that individual and says, come on down to Florida. I've got a big boat here. We've got booze, we've got broads, we've got anything you want. The government's unanswered question to you is, why Mr. Piro returned the money? And that question alone establishes reasonable doubt. What the government was doing is simply overwhelming and distracting you. The government takes the concessions and plays you bone-chilling, vulgar tapes of Mr. Piro asking for and receiving money. Now, let me deal with those tapes and with Mr. Piro's crass language. I never told you Mr. Piro was an altar boy. I never told you his behavior was saintly. Mr. Piro's conduct has brought dishonor and shame to himself, to his family, and to the office he holds. This is the real tragedy of the case. His manner and demeanor on those tapes offends your sensibilities and mine, but Mr. Piro is not on trial for his language. He is on trial for extortion. He is on trial for attempting and conspiring to distort money from a development company called the East Bay Development Corporation. Now, what about the principals of the East Bay who were marched in here as college professors? The fact is that these principals engaged in the bribery of public officials to the tune of $450,000 to $500,000. And they are now out scot-free with total immunity for themselves and all of their affiliates. That is, after the government blackmailed them into cooperation or fear of being prosecuted. And Timothy Creedon. Perhaps the saddest figure in this case, more so than Mr. Piro. Unfortunately, by the time the government was finished with him and put him on the stand, he was a briber of public officials. And Vincent Piro? He looks more like a victim than a defendant. He received $5,000, but he refused an additional $20,000. He has been indicted, he'll up to public scorn. He's in jeopardy. His career is at risk, and he risks losing whatever little of his reputation is left. And whose crime was this? Now, was Agent Callahan there just to react as he had said? No, he was there for the purpose of entrapping public officials. He was there for the purpose of purveying crime. He was there for the purpose of generating crime, and he succeeded. Who was the first mark? Timothy Creedon. He was easy. Suddenly, this printer is caught up in a scheme of corruption, and after they ply him with liquor and with money and with booze, they discard him with the same insensitivity with which they selected him. Once he's in the fold, they begin the process of Operation Gotcha. Now, at the very first meeting with Callahan, and for every meeting thereafter, and for every phone call thereafter, Callahan found a way to always ask about Piro. When can he meet with Piro? Now, the judge will tell you that there's nothing wrong with targeting per se. Callahan, in fact, says that the reasoning in doing it was that when he came on board in 1981, he had heard that there were allegations that Piro had been involved in some kind of payoff. But we never learned from whom those allegations emanated. But that was a hunting license. What was the genesis of the crime? Whose idea was it? Who created the crime and who generated the crime? By the time we're finished reviewing this evidence, you're going to be persuaded that the government created, perpetuated, and consummated this crime. All right, there's Piro. Do you see him chomping at the bit, just waiting to get at the East Bay? He doesn't respond. He doesn't call East Bay and say, "Hey guys, where is it? Put it on the table." He does nothing. He does not pursue East Bay. Callahan pursues him. They finally do get Piro. Now you remember that in 1980 there was capital legislation restricting the number of liquor licenses. That was very popular in the city of Somerville. Mr. Piro was firmly on record supporting licenses for the mall if, in fact, they needed them. Now, ladies and gentlemen, they, and by them I mean East Bay officials, have not shown to this minute that they needed them. There has not been one shred of evidence that anyone ever applied for a license, anyone ever sought a license, or anyone ever needed a license for anything. In fact, there's no reason why East Bay could not have obtained one of the licenses through legitimate channels. But East Bay didn't want to do that because, as Agent Callahan said, they needed to go this route for investigative reasons. So they filed the liquor license legislation after Timothy Creedon pays off half of the BOA, and Piro tells the staff, and this is unrefuted, to move the bill. The government says, but why did the bill that is, sit? Is that for Piro to disprove? If he was waiting for anything, why didn't he call East Bay and say, "Hey guys, this isn't going anywhere until I have a little meeting with you people"? But Piro never contacted East Bay. Now, let me show you just how sinister this really is. You want to test Piro? You want to bribe Piro? Go to him and see if you can get him to vote against his conscience. Oh, no. Make this one very easy. Got to leap in the door with Piro. Got to sneak up on him a little bit. You got to send an old friend up, a pathetic figure who tempts Piro. And it turns out to be true. He's leaving politics. He's moving out of the city of Somerville. His daughter is ill. He's getting pressure from his kids. His wife isn't well. And he has a chance to be a point man for this company. This is a good opportunity, and he needs help. And Piro does believe this is a fantasy because this is an individual who's talking $25,000 that everybody favors. And remember, despite all those statements, Agent Callahan, on cross-examination, finally admitted, "With Piro, I was active." And you know the rest. Piro does accept money from Agent Callahan. In the process, he behaves like a man without honor, like a man possessed, and he brings shame upon himself. And Callahan succeeds as a professional. and bringing out the worst in Piro. That's why the government likes those tapes. The tapes show you one thing. Piro took the money and he said it. He admitted it. But the government still hasn't told you why he gave it back. Give me one shred of evidence to show me that it is other than because Piro did not intend to keep it. That is the Achilles heel in the government's case, and there is just no way to close that chasm. When the government gets in the sleazy business of generating crime, they have a vested interest in the commission of crime. Can you believe the mentality of the FBI when they felt cheated when Piro gave the money back? When crime is prevented, the government should win. Why did they feel lost in this case? The reason for this is they're in the business of creating crime. Now, why did they continue contact with Piro after the money went back? Ladies and gentlemen, the reason is Mr. Piro had not consummated a crime with them. So they were going to take another few attempts at Piro, and they were going to try to weaken and erode his moral fiber so that maybe, just maybe, next time around, we'll get him. And what about the money? You've heard a lot in this case about FBI incident reports and tape recordings. Listen to the recording of April 21st, 1983. It's the only tape recording you have that doesn't show a time when Callahan terminates his contact with Piro. And it doesn't show a time when Callahan arrives at the undercover apartment. It's the only one. Finally, look at your witnesses. Do you think Creedon was telling the truth? Do you really think he was telling the truth? Or do you think he had some motive to lie? Do you think that he knows his helpfulness and his cooperation will impact on the recommendation as to whether he will be a free man or incarcerated? Now, the judge will charge you that one cannot conspire with a pretender. You know those tapes. They don't mean a thing in terms of conspiracy because Piro cannot conspire with an FBI agent. That is why it is so important for Creedon to try to change his grand jury testimony and try to create a conspiracy that didn't exist. He was Callahan's messenger. Mr. Callahan is a man who has lost his perspective. He's lived with this case. He's lied. He's cheated. He has befriended people. He has had to betray people, and his investment is in this case. It is a sad commentary indeed that the government has an expressed interest in the commission of crime. What you proved is you can tempt Piro. What you haven't proved is that you can corrupt Piro. And so, I am asking you to go into the jury room and return a verdict of not guilty because of reasonable doubt created in the government case, and let Mr. Piro return from this grueling experience and be back in the hands of his family. I thank you.
This concludes our readings from the transcripts of the trial of State Representative Vincent Piro. We have not attempted to prove the guilt or innocence of Mr. Piro. This will be decided in a court of law. We have tried to be fair and accurate in our selection of excerpts from various trial transcripts and in our portrayal of the characters involved in the case. We feel it is vital to make this information public because our elected officials must always remain accountable to us. Thank you for watching. Have a good evening.